the North Hollywood shootout, which could also be referred to as the Battle of North Hollywood, is an incident that occurred on February 28, 1997, and it was a clash between two heavily armed bank robbers, Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mătăsăreanu, and the LAPD. This shootout would result in the death of both robbers, along with 12 officers and 8 civilians being physically injured, and a myriad more individuals suffering trauma from the event. That is not to include the extensive damage caused by nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition being fired that day. He resorted to his pistol to exchange fire with the police officers. However, a grim reality seemed to dawn on Larry, or at least some believe led Larry to make a fateful decision to end things on his own terms, raising his pistol to his chin and pulling the trigger. However, some suggest an alternative narrative, one where Larry, hampered by his injury, attempted to manipulate the firearm's slide in order to get it into battery using his chin. In particular, it was a stovepipe jam. In this version of the tale, Larry only aerated his brain accidentally. However, to understand the shootout, you have to look into things such as the equipment used and the histories of those involved. They were a duo who would commit one of America's most notorious bank robberies. And in this robbery, it seems that the odds were really stacked against the cops, as all they had were standard issue sidearms, which at the time would be either 9mm pistols or potentially 38 special revolvers. And the odd patrol car here and there would have a 12-gauge shotgun. All the while, the bank robbers would be equipped with homemade body armor and have imbibed the barbiturate phenobarbital, along with having equipped themselves with the Norinco Type 56, a Chinese AK-47 AKM variant, which is often considered one of the most well-made variants of any AK derivative rifle. But they were not solely equipped with just AKs. They also carried a Bushmaster XM15, along with 100-round drum magazines. Both of these firearms must be noted to have been illegally modified to be select fire, but their armaments do not end there. They also carried an HK-91 rifle, and lastly a Beretta 92 FS. Now, with that out of the way, let's rewind things so we can focus in on the backgrounds of our infamous heisters. First up would be Larry Eugene Phillips, born on September 20th, 1970, and due to how his parents were not exactly the most upstanding of citizens, his early life is rather up in the air. This was due to him being born while both of his parents were fugitives, and it was to the point that they even changed his last name in order to avoid the ever-present eyes of the law. Yet despite his tumultuous upbringing, Larry would grow to idolize his father, eventually reverting back to the Phillips last name in order to honor his dad. Growing up, he reportedly witnessed his father's clashes with the police and frequent arrests. This upbringing fostered a deep-seated animosity towards law enforcement, propelling him towards a life of crime. Larry's criminal record would date back all the way to 1989, where he pilfered goods worth an estimated $400 from affluent neighborhoods in the LA area. Eventually, he would change his game and start real estate scams, duping clients into believing they had purchased properties he supposedly owned, resulting in a series of hefty losses for his victims. Despite facing constant reprisals, Larry would persist in his criminal endeavors, going so far as to resort to identity theft, often stealing his brother's ID to perpetrate his schemes, essentially straining their relationship to an extreme. His father, seeing him as a criminal mastermind, seemed to hold an undue amount of pride in his nefarious son, collecting newspaper clippings of Larry's crimes, proudly displaying his mugshot. In contrast, Larry's brother viewed him as manipulative, deceitful, and generally unlikable, as he had narrowly escaped on multiple occasions being framed for fraud by Larry. Larry was a trash to your brother, that can't be denied. And if you're that bad to your own family, how awful are you to other people? Now let's shift perspectives onto Emil, Larry's partner in crime. Born in Romania on July 19th, 1966, Emil immigrated to the US with his mother at the age of 10, later becoming a naturalized citizen in 1988. Unlike the outgoing Larry, Emil was introverted, having endured severe bullying during his formative years. However, I must note that this severe bullying does not excuse anything he would do later in life. In contrast to Larry's criminal path, Emil had originally pursued the American dream through honest hard work, as he dabbled in computer software consulting and assisting his mother in opening a care home for the mentally disabled. However, I would not say that they were quite so above board on things, as while these ventures did not prove fruitful, it seems that they mistreated those who they were supposed to care for, to the point that during an inspection, social workers made a disturbing discovery. A woman was locked in the basement without sustenance for an extended period of time. Moreover, Emil would suffer a severe head injury during an incident with a patient, leading to the necessity for brain surgery and subsequent epileptic seizures. It would be noted by many in Emil's family that he seemed to lack a certain assertiveness, one which made him all but subservient to the will of Larry, often deferring to him in any decision-making process. However, this wasn't due to a lack of intelligence, quite the opposite. It seemed that while Emil had a keen intellect, Larry seemed to prey on his social weaknesses in order to get Emil to study police reports in order to strategize their bank robberies. Within a year of their initial meeting, Larry was all but dominating the totality of Emil's life. Despite being 4 years younger, Larry's brother would go on to note that Larry was intentionally manipulating and breaking down Emil at every turn, in a similar manner to the way that cults get their followers to worship them. This control even extended to Emil's personal relationships, with Larry frequently criticizing Emil's preferences towards American women, citing their propensity to talk back, something that seemed to rather upset Larry. Larry's interference in Emil's life did not stop there. When Emil traveled back to Romania in order to bring his grandmother to the US, Larry insisted that he find and marry a woman there. In 1990, Emil would return to California with his grandmother and a new wife, whom he would later have children with. Upon Emil's return, Larry shifted their focus from small-scale operations to more lucrative endeavors, leveraging their shared passion for firearms in order to succeed in these more violent endeavors. Their next venture had escalated to a fully armed robbery. On July 20th, 1993 was when Emil and Larry executed their first major heist, targeting an armored van en route to the First Bank's Littleton branch in Colorado. They had meticulously planned their attack, as they had studied the van's routes, schedules, and cash transfer procedures to an extreme detail. The van's driver and assistant unlocked the vehicle just as Larry and Emil ambushed him with AK-47s, swiftly loading the money into bags before fleeing the scene. Their success was short-lived, as shortly after they were pulled over for speeding in Glendale. This led to a thorough search of their vehicle, which uncovered their cache of weaponry, including the AK-47s and explosives, along with smoke bombs, all of which were rather suspicious when they were stored right next to thousands of rounds of ammunition. One officer would go on to describe this as a bank robbery kit, and despite this potential evidence, all the duo would serve was a 100-day sentence with 3 years of probation, which concluded in January 1996. Remarkably, they were even able to reclaim their firearms after meeting certain bail conditions, enabling them to resume their criminal activities post-haste. It would be on June 14th, 1995 that Larry and Emil struck again. This time, they targeted an armored van near Winnetka Avenue, which was a branch of the Bank of America. While they managed to flee with the money, it seems that the guards put up quite a fight, resulting in one of the guards losing his life, turning them from merely bank robbers to murderers. All the while, another security guard sustained serious lifelong injuries. Although the armored van heists were rather lucrative, Larry and Emil hungered for more substantial gains, as they would set their eyes right onto the banks themselves. Devising plans to don full body armor, Larry would create his own handcrafted set of body armor in such a way that essentially made him impervious to almost all small arms fire. Emil, on the other hand, opted for a more mobile set of body armor, so he decided to wear torso armor and augmented it with a thick metal plate carried in a tactical vest in order to deflect heavier rounds from his vital areas. And now armed with their AK-47s, they would target Bank of America branches across the area, exploiting the vulnerability of teller windows, which were specifically designed to withstand both handgun and shotgun fire, but were unable to protect the staff from the incredible penetration granted by the 7.62 by 39 round fired out of the AK-47 and its variants. It seems their modus operandi was a swift and precise strike, subduing everyone, using force on the manager in order to make them open the vault, filling their bags with cash, then escaping, all within 8 minutes. This was the estimated response time of police. In May 1996 alone, they would hit 2 Bank of America branches, netting approximately $1.7 million. This, combined with their armored van raids, led their total haul to be an impressive $2 million. After a string of heists linked to the same perpetrators, the culprits would gain the moniker the High Incident Bandits for their use of terror tactics and extravagant gear. Flush with cash from their previous endeavors, they would go on to set their sights on something bigger, a Bank of America branch on Laurel Canyon Boulevard in North Hollywood. This was to be a rather juicy target. After several months of preparation that included extensive reconnaissance, they would go on to hit the Bank of America located at 6600 Laurel Canyon Boulevard. And it seemed that Phillips and Mătăsăreanu were armed with one semi-automatic HK-91 along with several illegally converted fully automatic weapons, 2 Norinco Type 56S rifles, along with a fully automatic Norinco Type 56S1 and a fully automatic Bushmaster XM15 dissipator, which had been equipped with a triangular M16A1 styled handguard. But I mean, they were already committing felonies and they even killed someone, so illegally modifying weapons really isn't much of an escalation. It was also noted that the robbers allegedly filled what is referred to as jam jars with gasoline and placed them in the backseat of the car, with the intention of setting the car and the weapons on fire and destroying the evidence of their robbery. For this robbery, Phillips would wear roughly 40 pounds of equipment, including a Type 3A bulletproof vest, along with a groin guard, a load-bearing vest with multiple mags of ammunition, and military-styled ammo pouches. This, along with several pieces of homemade body armor, would cover almost the entirety of his body, all the way from his shins, thighs, forearms, chest. Essentially, he was covered head to toe in body armor. Now, Mătăsăreanu would only wear a Type 3A bulletproof vest. However, he would include a metal ballistic plate under it in order to protect his vital organs. Additionally, each man would wear a sewn-in watch on the back of a glove in order to maintain their timing and monitor where and what they should be doing. To top it all off, before entering, they took the barbiturate phenobarbital, which was prescribed to Mătăsăreanu as a sedative in order to calm their nerves and also decrease their reaction to being shot. The forensic toxicology lab would eventually show that they had also taken epinephrine and phentoprolamine, or at least Phillips had, and Mătăsăreanu had taken phenytoin. Now, on February 28th, 1997, these bandidos donned their trademark body armor and, while armed to the teeth, would approach the bank just prior to 9:17 a.m. as they synchronized their watches with the expected response times. However, it seemed that Murphy's Law would be in effect, as their plans would go awry right from the beginning, due to a squad car spotted them, which triggered an immediate call for backup, and seeing as they set their alarms to notify them within the 8 minutes, things would not go so well. As the two were walking in, they were spotted by LAPD officers Lauren Farrell and Martin Parello, who were driving down Laurel Canyon in their patrol car. Officer Farrell issued a call on the radio, which would become synonymous with a song by Megadeth. 15A43, requesting assistance. We have a possible 211 in progress at the Bank of America. As they entered the bank, both wielding their AK-47s, Phillips and Mătăsăreanu forced a customer to leave an ATM near the lobby, and getting them onto the floor. A security guard inside saw the scuffle happening and he radioed his partner. Unfortunately, the call was not received, causing Phillips to shout, "This is a fucking holdup," before he and Mătăsăreanu opened fire into the ceiling, with the intent that would scare everybody into complying. This caused approximately 30 bank staff and customers to be discouraged from resisting. Mătăsăreanu would go on to shoot open a bulletproof door, which was not rated for 7.62 by 39 rounds. Then, both assailants would force the assistant manager, John Vidergana, to open the vault and to begin to fill their bags with money. Unfortunately for them, due to a change in the delivery schedule, rather than the $750,000 that the gunman expected, the vault merely contained $300,000, significantly less than what they wanted. This set off Mătăsăreanu, who fired into the bank vault, destroying much of the money. Then he would demand that the ATM be opened so they may take the money within. However, once again, Murphy's Law came into action. Due to a change in the bank's policies, the manager no longer had access to it, which left them with only a small fraction of their intended loot. Adding insult to injury, a dye pack that had been hidden amongst the money exploded, which rendered much of what they could have had functionally worthless. Outside, the first responding officers heard the gunfire within the bank and made another radio call, reporting shots fired, before taking cover behind their patrol car. While the robbers were still inside, additional North Hollywood police officers and detectives would arrive, taking strategic positions at all four corners of the bank and establishing a perimeter. Approximately at 9:24 a.m., Phillips exited through the north doorway, and after spotting a police cruiser 200 feet away from him, he opened fire. In the initial shooting, Phillips ended up wounding Sergeant Dean Haynes, along with officers Martin Whitfield and James Sobravan, Stuart Guy, and detectives William Kulrock and Tracy Angeles, as well as 3 civilians who had hunkered down behind Sergeant Hayes' police car. Phillips also fired shots at an LAPD helicopter flown by Charles D. Paraguay Jr. as it surveyed the scene from above, forcing the helicopter to withdraw to a safe distance. This led Phillips to briefly go back into the bank and re-emerge once again through the north doorway. All the while, Mătăsăreanu exited through the south exit as the chaos unfolded within the bank. Squad cars would quickly convey, blocking any and all escape routes they could. Now the bandits found themselves surrounded by law enforcement, and you might think it would be over for Mătăsăreanu and Phillips from here. However, their body armor had been designed to deal with anything the police could have on hand. Even at close range, a shotgun blast with slugs would merely just jostle them, a mild inconvenience at worst. However, for the police, this was a daunting challenge, since their handguns were ineffective at the ranges they were firing from, and the bandits were relentless with automatic fire that left them with little time for any precise aiming, so there could be no magical headshot taken. Now you might ask, why were their police so ill-equipped? And that in part lies to the politics of the time. Following the infamous Rodney King riots, local politicians were rather wary of arming police further, fearing another public outcry and more riots, which are never good for elections. They essentially rescinded any efforts for officers to equip themselves with more efficient weaponry, leading to the situation the officers were now trapped in. As they continued to return fire at both the robbers, they found that anything they had was a joke to Phillips and Mătăsăreanu. This was compounded further still when the getaway vehicle would be pulled in approximately 10 to 15 minutes into the shootout. And as things would progress, the officers were told that they should not stop the getaway vehicle due to them having automatic weapons and them having nothing that could practically stop them. This is somewhat ironic because just prior to this, Californian politicians had rejected requests to have officers equipped with AR-15 pattern rifles, which would have promptly dealt with the types of body armor that Mătăsăreanu and Phillips were wearing. Unfortunately, the officers would be left with this disadvantage. Due to the caliber and the penetrating power of the AK's rounds, it was quickly discovered by the police officers and the civilians taking cover behind their squad cars that the cars as cover were a really bad idea. And due to the lack of equipment to deal with the threat, the police officers were essentially sitting ducks. As the chaos unfolded, the media would descend upon the scene, capturing the drama as it escalated further and further still. Even those in helicopters found themselves as targets, so everyone was fair game. Amidst this chaos, it seemed that even though Emil was telling Larry to join him, Larry wasn't having any of it. Being so frustrated by all the mishaps that had happened that day, he decided to take out his anger and frustrations upon everybody he could, so he would continue to fire upon everyone and anyone that wasn't his partner in crime. And this was 7 minutes into the firefight, where they had a clear opportunity to get away, especially since the police officers were pinned down by the constant sprays of gunfire. It would be at this point that several officers would go and attempt to procure AR-15 style rifles from nearby gun shops. But as this was happening, 2 locations adjacent to the bank's north parking lot would provide cover for officers and responding detectives, while other police officers who had been actively firing at Phillips near 4 vehicles adjacent to the north wall of the bank. One location, in particular the one taken by Officer Richard Zelinsky of the Valley Traffic Division, was essentially just an area adjacent to the Del Dago restaurant's west wall, 351 feet from Phillips. He did this in order to draw Phillips' attention and fire away from Sergeant Haynes and Officer Whitfield, who had both been wounded and only been marginally able to recover, as they hid behind trees just across Laurel Canyon Boulevard. The other location that proved to be advantageous for the LAPD officers was the backyard of 6641 Agnes Avenue, which had a rather thick cinder block wall, providing them with some modicum of cover. With their 9mm pistols, Detective Vince Bancroft and Detective Kevin Harley were able to position themselves behind cover quickly and fire between 15 to 24 rounds at Phillips from a distance of 55 feet. Eventually, Phillips would receive a gunshot wound to his left wrist. As this confrontation reached its 10-minute mark, non-lethal casualties mounted amongst both law enforcement and civilians, as frantic efforts were underway not only to neutralize the bandits, but also to rescue the severely wounded individuals before they would succumb to their injuries. Nearby, in a dental clinic, the staff would offer refuge to one injured officer and some amount of treatment due to him having sustained a gunshot wound to the back. The dentist had improvised with the resources available, and he was able to somewhat dress the wound, keeping the police officer from succumbing to his injuries. Despite the officer's many attempts, they were not able to reach those closest to the bandits' line of fire. And here is where the officers finally get an edge, as some officers got to the local gun store known as B&B, where the owner generously provided rifles and ammunitions without formalities, and a plan was quickly greenlit, arming the officers with all that he could, as they would need to confront the escalating threat until SWAT teams could arrive. However, things would not be so easy, as officers had to commandeer an armored van en route to the targeted bank, allowing them to swiftly evacuate the wounded individuals from the danger zone, and shifting the momentum, causing Larry to decide that it was time to flee, and rather than hastily escape himself, he would provide cover fire for Emil as he drove off. This was despite the SWAT team's efforts as they had arrived. Officers would caution against engaging the bandits directly, prioritizing the safety of the wounded officers and the injured civilians. However, determined not to let the dangerous duo escape, the remaining officers actively disabled their getaway vehicle by damaging the vehicle with anything and everything they had on hand. Sensing the shift in momentum, Larry decided it was time to flee, and rather than hastily escape, he would provide cover fire for Emil as he drove off. Despite SWAT's arrival and the reinforcements, radio operators would hazard anyone from engaging the bandits directly. Eventually, Larry, seeking refuge from the escalating confrontation, darted to a nearby corner, seeking cover behind a parked vehicle. With law enforcement quickly closing in and his options dwindling, he saw only one path forward, engaging in a desperate firefight with the encroaching officers. As the chaos seemed to reach a climax, an officer would manage to land a rather fortunate shot, severing Larry's unprotected thumb. Despite his injury, he would persist struggling against the officers, But he would soon encounter yet another critical setback. His AK-47 jammed. Unable to clear this malfunction due to his maimed hand, Larry decided to discard the rifle and resorted to his pistol to exchange fire with the police officers. However, a grim reality seemed to dawn on Larry, or at least some believe led Larry to make a fateful decision to end things on his own terms, raising his pistol to his chin and pulling the trigger. However, some suggest an alternative narrative, one where Larry, hampered by his injury, attempted to manipulate the firearm's slide in order to get it into battery using his chin. In particular, it was a stovepipe jam. In this version of the tale, Larry only aerated his brain accidentally. As the dust settled from Larry's dramatic demise, Emil still remained at large, albeit in a battered and heavily bullet-ridden state. The vehicle was shot up to hell and back, and it wasn't getting any better. Injured and desperate, he scanned the streets for an escape plan, spotting a yellow Jeep heading right his way, and it is here where he decided to pull out something straight out of GTA, as he aimed for the Jeep's windshield, prompting the driver to flee in a panic, leaving the car. Attempting to seize what he viewed as an opportunity to escape, Emil quickly transferred his belongings into the abandoned vehicle. However, it does not seem he was very lucky, as the owner of the vehicle had taken the keys to the Jeep. And before he could react and try to escape in another way, a squad car screeched to a halt right in front of him. These officers were the ones who were brandishing their newly procured AR rifles. With no choice, Emil decided to retreat to his original getaway car, exchanging sporadic gunfire with the police once more, who were unable to target his head or land any fatal blows, and it took an approximate barrage of 29 bullets to bring Emil down, marking the end of the 44-minute standoff. The final shot rang out at 10:04 a.m., signaling Emil's supposed surrender. It was a lopsided battle as police advanced with weaponry bared and ready to end Emil once and for good, with officers only now armed with the weaponry necessary to end Emil's life. In the culmination of this ordeal, it was estimated that the bandits discharged approximately 1,200 rounds, averaging a shot every 2 or so seconds throughout the entire skirmish. When police finally apprehended Emil, he supposedly refused to cooperate. Some reports show that he demanded that the officers end his life with a bullet. Despite his pleas, the police called for medical assistance. However, due to safety protocols, the EMTs would be prohibited from entering what was known as a hot zone without proper escort, as an area with an active shooter or even a potential active shooter was not one that EMTs were allowed to enter in such a state, causing a severe delay in the ambulance. And by the time that the EMTs had reached the scene, Emil, now essentially Swiss cheese, died from blood loss. Remarkably, regardless of the intensity of the gunfire exchanged, no bystanders or cops succumbed to their injuries. However, there were 12 injured police officers and 8 civilians who sustained significant degrees of physical harm. These civilians were Mildred Notel, who sustained a facial injury, John Villajanera, who endured a blow to the head from the butt of one of the rifles, Javier Ocaso, who suffered facial trauma, Barry Goldling, who was wounded by flying glass and shrapnel, Tracy Fisher, who sustained an injury to the left ankle, Michael Horan, who was struck in the left side of the chest, Jose Haro, who suffered injuries from flying glass and shrapnel, William Marr, who sustained injuries to the right arm, left temple, and nose from shrapnel and glass fragments. 19 of the police officers involved would eventually receive commendations and the Medal of Valor, along with the opportunity to meet with the President of the United States. However, not everyone was hailed for their actions. Emil's family attempted to sue some of the arresting officers, alleging neglect for allowing Emil to bleed out. However, the lawsuit didn't progress any further, and the family had to withdraw in order to avoid charges of malicious prosecution, which is a term I didn't even know existed. Despite the turmoil, there were positive outcomes, as perceptions shifted from suspicion to admiration of law enforcement, at least for the time, prompting politicians to prioritize the safety of police officers, thereby prioritizing the mitigation of any harm that could be caused by crazed gunmen. legislation was enacted granting LAPD officers access to AR-15s, which would be stored in their patrol cars, which was a policy that would be adopted by several other states. In conclusion, the saga of Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mătăsăreanu and the infamous North Hollywood shootout stands as a testament to the complexities of law enforcement and the dangers of being ill-equipped, along with what determination and maliciousness can accomplish. From their humble beginnings to their audacious heists, the duo of criminals sparked reforms in policy around police weapons and unintentionally would contribute to the militarization of police. And while the shootout resulted in tragic casualties and injuries, it also showcased the potential valor and determination of officers who were willing to risk their lives in order to protect their community. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.